Alright YouTubes, in today's video we've got a Audi to paint and I'm just going to go through the primer stage of it. Nothing major, a couple of repairs. These are aluminium, these doors. I was in a bit of a rush to get this repaired because I'm a bit behind with it, so I didn't record it, but there was it wasn't too bad. It was a little bit tricky on this, we had to get behind it in the end. Did try some glue pulling. It was it's been cuffed across these two doors and the side skirt as well, so it didn't cause major damage, but it put a bit of a deform in this feature line and sort of made the inner skin sort of edge poke through, which is quite a standard thing. When you hit bottoms of doors, you can see the little edge of the inner skin poking through. So it was just a little bit of pushing and tapping and pulling with a glue gun, messing about. But yeah, we got it near enough and got that in one skim. Well, no, actually two skims, sorry. I had to refill the top. So it wasn't too bad. So we're going to be priming these two doors and then a little bit of repair on the side skirt and just prime the side skirt all over. So I'm just going to use this video. I've got a new primer gun, so I'll show you it. And I'm not showing off. And I haven't used it yet, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I always like to use a new gun. I know it's only a primer gun, but I've got a new Satajet. It's a 100B, which I've already got, 100B RP, and I've got a 1.8 setup on that, and it's great for transferring good layers of primer for big areas. But it's a little bit heavy sometimes for spot repairs. I do wind it in a little bit, and it's quite susceptible for putting it on thick. So when I've got big repairs, and they may be finished off in like 180 grit, which is of course I would leave a repair in. But if it's a big area to prime, that gun's brilliant for that. Priming full bumpers, like I say, big repairs, big panels, like priming complete bonnets and all that, because it lays down a lot of product quite fast. So I rein it in, and it can be a bit finicky for spot repairs, but I've always got on with it. So anyway, waffling on. So I've got another 100B RP, and this one's the 100-year anniversary edition. And I've got 1.6 in this, so it's a little bit lighter. And I've been using different primers. I've got more primers that I use now from the Mipa range. So a job like this, those repairs are finished off in 220 grit on the filler and then 240 grit, all the sanding around it. So I don't need a massive build. Sometimes I can find it if I use the 4+1 primer in the high build mixing ratio. There is an even higher build mixing ratio if you swap the hardener out to a HS hardener. I find, if I put too much on, in a few spots, on a flat panel, I can actually see a little bit of build of primer if I haven't blocked it right through. So it can overload it. I know I can reduce the amount I put on there. It is a real high build primer, and with that 1.8 on there, sometimes I'm maybe getting a bit too much build. And like I say, I have noticed it, so I've wanted a 1.6. The other primer I've been using a lot of lately is the Mipa Multifiller, which is it's been in a previous video. It's for multiple surfaces, so it's good for plastic, good for bare metal, good for aluminium, good for a good array of substrates, great adhesion to them all. So it's direct to metal, so it's ideal for this. It's not quite as high build as the 4+1 in the high build mixing ratio, so it's good for these little small spot repairs. And I think combined with this 1.6 setup, it'd be perfect for that job. So I've got a bit of bare aluminium on there, plus plastic, so the Multifiller is a good choice for that. So I've been using that more and more on a lot of jobs, especially on the plastics now. Totally using it on plastics all the time, not using the 4+1 anymore. They sort of say it can, especially if you've got a lot of build on there on plastics, it's quite hard. It's not as flexible as the Multifiller. It will go on plastic and all the rest of it, but if you've had to use a fair amount of it, chippy front bumpers, you're going to load a load on there to try and fill in all the imperfections. It can it only has to take little knocks, and it can like spider web and get real fine hairline cracks in it. So the 4+1 the 4+1 isn't ideal for plastic. And it's not ideal for metal neither, so normally if I've got bare metal I stick a bit of half promoter on there if it's nice clean metal, or I would put epoxy on it. So the Multifiller's a good sort of all-rounder. Get some on there with this new gun for the first time, see how it lays down, and then yeah, once we've got it in primer, we'll go through the preparation and we get that painted. We're painting the whole side on that car, so I'll get the primer mixed up and we'll get some on there.
All right, YouTubes, how are we all doing? I hope you're all well. Hope you had a good New Year, and you're not suffering too much with the January blues. I'm surprisingly bright actually for the beginning of January. It's not been a bad start, to be honest, and hope it's all well for you. And if it's not, I hope and pray things get better for you. So I've had first week back at work this week. This footage is from last year, and yeah, within a couple of days, Christmas was long forgotten about, and the pressure started with jobs needing to go out and all the rest of it. But it's all good. It's all good. So this job, yeah, using my new primer gun for the first time, and I didn't quite set it up right actually. I had it, it was wound in a bit too far, so I didn't have it as full trigger, but I never noticed it at the time. I was probably just too excited to see how well it put primer on. So I know primer's not a major issue because you're going to be flattening it anyway, but different repairs require a bit of a different application, and like I said earlier, I'm using different primers for different scenarios. Small little repairs that are finished off fine don't require the same sort of build and film thickness as, you know, a big filler repair or trying to fill in multiple layers. So there's different scenarios of different repairs, so I think it helps to have different gun setups and different products depending on the type of repair you're doing. Like I said, if you're trying to fill in a load of imperfections on a front bumper, you want to get a good layer on there. If you've got a tiny couple of little knuckle dents that you've repaired, or you know, small repairs, small scratches and breakthroughs, then again you want a different product and a different gun setup. So this 1.6 setup on this gun bridges a gap for me really, because I've got the 1.8 for the big heavy bulky high layers and high transfer, and then I've got a 1.4 which I use for wet on wet, and I use for thin primer and, you know, just surfacer primer and stuff that I don't require a high build on, where I use my quick dry primer where it's just some thin layers for the small little repairs and scratches and stuff. So this is a good in between for me. Like I say, that 1.8 can be a bit heavy when you're spotting in. Again, down to your product, down to how you apply. I like to put a decent coat of everything that I put on. I like to put good layers on. So I am inclined, it has a detrimental effect on some of my jobs sometimes where I put too much product on. So yeah, this was a good gap filler for me, this gun, and it put a decent coat on. Where this is the first time I've used it, like I said earlier, I didn't have it fully wound out, so I needed a little bit more primer on this job, because I ended up busting through on the filler repair on the door quite quickly and quite easily. Next time I used this gun, I realised I had it wound in a full turn and not full trigger. I think I was just too excited to get it out and try it, because I'd had it for a few days and not used it. So we'll go through the preparation, get this prepped up, ready to mask. So it's the same preparation I do on all the high build 2K primer work. I do everything dry sanding, 2K primers nowadays are not really geared up for wet sanding. So all dry, and I start off, and I always block it with 320 grit. With the cube, I use a 3M Cubitron on the strips because they just last and they cut well, and they just keep on going forever, to be honest with you. So I start at one end, and I start blocking straight, depending on the shape of the panel, try and go across. Then I do a bit of cross hatching, and then I normally finish off in circles. So I try and follow the way you would look down a panel. That's the way I would block it initially. In the curve where I am now, I have got some curved edged blocks, and I've got an attachment for that 3M block that's got a round edge. And depending on, you know, what that repair's like in there, sometimes it can look a little bit 50p piece looking. That's what I call it. It looks like a 50p piece where it's not, you know, it's got some edging round it. It's not completely round in there. So ideally it's better to use something with a curved edge in there, or the curved attachment that goes on this block. But I do cheat a little bit, and I use the edge of the block. But the shape in there was fine. There was only a bit of a repair in there. Didn't really get into that recess too much with a repair, so I done it with a block. And it can be a bit tricky on a door like this, where you block into the end. If you've had to fully prime to that end, the wing's in the way for you, you know, to go across it, to get that block to go right off the edge. If the door was off, you can go right off the edge. So you have to sort of turn the block a little bit and go up at it, go up at angles. So yeah, get the primer blocked off. Try and get all the shaping in there with the block. Just keep it moving. Work in an area, go to another area, and then sort of just transition your areas that you have blocked. And I follow all the lines, and, you know, keep my feature lines sharp initially in the block stage. I normally refine the feature lines in the next stage, in the refining stage, where I hit it with 500, and then I'll get my lines then. So I keep them sharp. I don't really block or 320 the lines at this stage. And then, yeah, once I've done the blocking and gone across straight and angles, I then just take, you can get a little bit of scoring, just take a bit of that out with a bit of circle work, then just to try and transition it all in together. You know, you can cause prepping marks by blocking too hard, or blocking, you know, at funny angles. You can cause scoring in the primer. And as well, blocking too hard, these panels are quite rigid, but again, if you block too hard and you're making the panel flex, same with filler, block primer like filler, if you block too hard, you're pushing that panel in, you're not cutting that product straight, you're creating ripples in it by, you know, blocking too hard. Sometimes making the panel flex will cause ripples, because you're pushing that panel and pushing that product, the filler or the primer, you're pushing it in, and you're not cutting the product to give you the level. You know, it's basically following what the shape of the panel as you're pushing it in, so you're not going to get no levels from that. So there is a fine balance, and it really helps when you've got good sandpaper, or even coarser grits. It's not about all the time trying to make everything feel smooth. If you've got a coarser grit, then you're going to use less pressure. So you could go 240. If you've got a real high build of primer on there, you could even off the bat lightly use 180. And if you're light with it, with a coarse grit, this applies to filler and primer, you're better off going coarser and lighter, and it will just cut straighter. And, you know, it works with primer as well. But I find, unless I think I've got a bit of a problem area and I've just gone for primer, and trying to get a little bit more level out of primer, which you shouldn't really be trying to achieve too much level out of primer. You're making the product work too hard. Then I would put more primer on and cut it a bit coarser initially, so I'm not applying too much pressure. Then I'm letting the paper and the block cut through it, and you haven't got to sand it as hard with a coarser grit, and it's a lighter and faster, straighter cut doing it that way. And then you just got to obviously work through some more grades to get yourself up to the grade for paint to be applied onto. So once I've done all the areas that I can do with the block and done all the block work, I do that first initially. I'll then go round all edges and curves or anywhere where the blocks struggle to get into. Again with 320, these are the 3M 320 cloths. Again, they last for ages, but I use them and the normal soft pads and go round all the edges and get all that primer knocked off round all the edges with 320 grit as well. And then once I've done that, I do mix it up a little bit. I either go round all the edges then initially with 500 grit and then finish all the faces with 500 grit on the dual action sander, or I do it the other way sometimes. Once all the 320 grit's been done, I do the faces with 500 grit D8 and then do the edges. Do it both ways, to be honest. There's no right or wrong. It's whatever you're comfortable with and whatever suits you and gives you the results that you're looking for. So yeah, I find a good dust guide coat works really well. Work it into all those scratches so you can see those 320 scratches. The last thing you want is them to be missed, and they do get missed quite easily. It happens to me very often that I get it in the booth and I can still see some scoring from the 320 grit. And again, I know I'm not sponsored or affiliated with 3M, but their sanding, their Cubitron stuff there's nothing else there that comes close to it in my eyes. 500 grit on primer, even good decent makes of sanding discs. I have the thick soft pad on. You want the thick soft pad on so you're just gliding over it. There's two types of soft pad. I've got a 5mm and a 10mm. Primer work when I'm refining now to get it to the paint stage, I always use 10mm on primer for refining primer, because it just flexes more round all the contours and you're not going to really affect any levels and cause any rippling with it being a bit too flat, the DA. So like I say, I've used all makes of 500 grit, and primer, high-build primer, is a real chalky, dusty product, and they just clog. No matter how good your extraction is, they clog really quick. They just start pigtailing and you can cause bits of hard product to stick to the disc, and then it will cause little pigtails in your primer, and they can show in the paint. And I've found with these Cubitron ones, they just don't hold the product. They cut for ages. So a job like this, even with the medium quality 3M ones, the blue 3M ones, I would probably use about 500 discs. And on this job I use one Cubitron disc, and it still feels like it's got life in there. So I put them back in the box. They just go forever. They're well expensive. They're way more expensive than the other discs, and you only get half the amount in a box. But like I say, as a ratio of like 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, 4 or 5 of another disc compared to one Cubitron, they're great value for money, and I highly recommend them. I'm not like I say, I'm not affiliated with them or sponsored by them. They just work really well, and it's false economy, I think, chucking all these discs away, keep having a change, so you save a bit of time, and the grit on them is perfect, so you don't have any issues with that. Sometimes you'll find with cheaper discs, they say what grit they are, and they're not quite that grit, or they're inconsistent on the grit. And I found that before, that I can see a 500 grit with another make. I can see in certain colours, I can see it a little bit in the base coat. So you get better consistency with the more expensive discs. False economy, I think, sometimes, but there you go. And yeah, just put a bit of protection on that edge, where I'm just feathering that edge of primer out, so I don't catch any of the internal bits that I don't want to get any paint on, and just go round, finishing off any oversprays where you're doing spot repairs. I haven't primed that end to end, that panel. You'll get little dry spots around edges of primer, and just make sure you sand those out nice and fine and nice and smooth. So thanks for watching, really appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe and all that good stuff, and we'll see you again soon. Look after yourselves.